Yamagara, everyone. My name is Ray Lovett, and together with Bobby, we're presenting today. As a Nyampa Wangabon man, I want to start by acknowledging country and the lands and pay my respect to elders past and present and other mob here with us today. So today, Bobby and I are going to be speaking about how we move from principles to practice. And I'm not actually talking about care, but I am talking about the Maher Wingara Indigenous Data Sovereignty Principles, which are the domestic Indigenous Data Sovereignty Principles here in Australia. But we're going to talk about those and how we move from principles to practice within a specific project that we're conducting in the ACT, which is the Capital Territory here in Australia. And specifically within that, within the Health Directorate, given that we're both health researchers. But I guess some background about us and IDSov first. So both Bobby and I are mob, but Bobby is Yamadi Noongar Gidja, and as I mentioned, I'm Nyampa Wangabon. We're both epidemiologists, and we both primarily work on health cohort studies and evaluations. Today I'm going to give an overview of IDSov, so my job, the M&W principles and the current Commonwealth policy landscape, and Marcia talked a little bit to that this morning at the keynote. Bobby will then speak about the IDGov implementation using 6 steps that we've applied and are currently actively going through in the ACT. So to reiterate, IDSov, or Indigenous Data Sovereignty, is the right of Indigenous peoples to govern the collection, management, access, interpretation, dissemination and reuse of data related to them, and the foundations of which come from the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And Australia has ratified those rights, although we currently don't comply with them. It is important to recognise that IDSov is a global movement, so we come at this very much from the global perspective. And while there are more recent developments in formal ways, Indigenous peoples have created, collected, curated and distributed data through their knowledge systems since time began. And while this session alludes to care, one of the points I wanted to make about care is that there's guidance around care, particularly where there are domestic Indigenous Data Sovereignty principles in place, called Care Also Directs Us Home, that it's the M&W principles should be applied in the domestic setting where appropriate. The current academic literature on IDSov and IDGov can be found here, so I just wanted to give a shout out to that website. There I am, and Bobby as well. But quickly, the IDSov summit hosted by the Maher Wingara Indigenous Data Sovereignty Collective in 2008 determined that in Australia, Indigenous peoples have the right to exercise control of the data ecosystem, including all those aspects of the data lifecycle, data that are contextual and disaggregated, so available and accessible at individual community and First Nations levels, data that are relevant and empower sustainable self-determination and self-governance, and data structures that are accountable to Indigenous peoples and First Nations, and data that are protective and respects our individual and collective interests. So you can see there's quite a bit of overlap with care in these principles as well. And given I was one of the authors of the care principles, you can see that we brought our respective principles from our domestic countries to that global forum. So as a few people have already talked about, Indigenous Data Sovereignty is enacted through Indigenous Data Governance. So Indigenous Data Sovereignty is primarily, in Australia particularly, as Marcia said this morning, a political philosophy and a political action. Because we don't have those legal rights that some other Indigenous peoples have here. 2 years ago, we tried to make some way into that, but we said no, unfortunately. But in other Indigenous lands, they do have legal standing. Within the current Commonwealth Closing the Gap policy, we've also heard about Priority Reform 4, all those different priority reforms. And 4 specifies that data sharing is to occur, i.e. data from people to government and data from government to people. While many people and communities are contributing data through access to their services and engagement in administrative systems, very little data is shared back to those communities to inform their decision-making efforts. So that's been highlighted this morning as well. So what we're embarking on is a systems change approach in the ACT to enact IDGov to address health data and ensure that that health data can be governed by local Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the ACT. Bobby will now take you through how IDGov is being developed and implemented.
Great. Hi, everyone. As Ray mentioned, we're doing this project in the ACT. So the Indigenous population is roughly 9,000 people as per the 2021 census. There is an overall population of around 454,000 people, but obviously that fluctuates from time to time. So this is just a little model, really, of our project that we're working with the ACT, Indigenous, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community around developing an Indigenous data governance structure. So we're collaborating with the local community and with the ACT Health Directorate. So we're sort of looking at a small piece of the pie in the ACT government, because they currently have 9 directorates, so our focus, as Ray said, is on health. And really our Indigenous data governance structure is aiming to exercise control of the data ecosystem, so this is relating to that health data that the ACT Health Directorate hold, provide advice on context statements and disaggregation of data reporting from the ACT health data sets, how data from the ACT Health Directorate empowers sustainable self-determination and effective self-governance, and how ACT health data structures are accountable to the local mob. And lastly, how data compilation from the ACT Health Directorate is protective and respects individual and collective interests. So we're using these principles and embedding them through this Indigenous data governance structure. This is just like an overview of the project. So I'm going to talk through each of those 6 steps. So really the first step was around socialising the concepts of Indigenous data sovereignty and Indigenous data governance. So we started with the ACT Health Directorate Executive, where we presented to them as a way of getting them on the same page and just introducing them to the concepts and presenting our project plan. We then did a lot of work sort of internally with the ACT Health Directorate, particularly those teams that are involved with data stewarding the data and the custodians. And just went through the principles of IDSov and the project plan. And then later we ran the Mayamnari Wingara fundamentals of IDSov modules with them. So this is part of the socialising, and that was over a couple of days. We are also presenting on those modules in the posters, so you can come along to that this evening, 6 o'clock. So then the second part was we went back to the ACT Health Directorate to get them to do a data audit. So really we wanted to understand all the data assets that they currently hold that are inclusive of Indigenous data. So this roughly took them around 12 months to compile this list. But we are going to be using this list as a mapping project then when we're working with our local mob in the ACT and the Indigenous data governance structure. Oh, God. Okay, and I'll quickly just go through the last few stages. So this is just how we've engaged with the ACT Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. We've held one community forum around developing the IDGov structure, and we're about to do our second forum where we are actually going to finalise that structure, and we'll undertake that data mapping around their priorities and map them to the list of data assets that were provided by the ACT Health Directorate. And then we'll undertake some capability training, so we'll roll out our fundamentals of IDSov, modules 1 to 3, with people that are interested in the project. And then with the Indigenous Data Governance structure, we're going to then also do the last 5 modules, which are primarily on the IDSov principles. We also have a data literacy and practice training, and we'll develop the terms of reference for the structure. And then this is for the ACT Health Directorate to explore their own internal policies and adjust those to match this external Indigenous data governance structure. So the structure actually sits outside of the ACT government, so it's independent. And they will also support and resource the Secretariat. And then we will also sort of monitor and evaluate the system, so understand what are the changes using systems dynamics within the ACT Health Directorate, but also engage stakeholders of that system as well. Thank you.